So, hello everyone. I'm here with David English from up north from Canada. So your name is English, but you don't live in England. Isn't that odd? Am I the first person to have asked you that?
No, no, no. I've had some interesting looks when going through customs in various countries.
Okay. So we used to work together a couple of years ago for a couple of years, I think.
That's right.
Back when you still lived in Vancouver, I think. Now you've moved further east, I believe.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm in Quebec now, just north of Ottawa.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we already did one recording together where we approximated pi using the very sophisticated Monte Carlo method, aka just throwing random dots at the screen and then counting them and then approximating pi that way. But we had a bit of a technical issue on my end, so we're doing a new session.
Yeah, I don't think the blame's on you on your end.
No, I sabotaged that on purpose so we'd have more time together. And so after doing approximating pi, it was like the question, what do we do for our next session? Like that's pretty hard to top, right? Like you're
hmm
calculating like one of the most important constants of the universe. Like how do we go from there? And so I think the logical conclusion that both of us simultaneously came up with is the next session has to be about JavaScript job interview questions. That's
So
logically the only
it's the
place to
logical
go.
progression. Yep.
Exactly. And so what I did was I went to Google and I typed in JavaScript job interview questions, I
Mhm.
think. And so these are all from the first results page, right? So I didn't actually look for these specifically to look for silly examples or whatever. This is like legit stuff. So I suggest we start with this one because I was fascinated by how old the information was, and some of it's so old that I. Okay, so anyway, so it starts out with what is JavaScript, which I think is a great JavaScript job interview question. Like, you're applying for a JavaScript position, they're like, okay, what is JavaScript? And the second question I thought was even better: enumerate the differences between Java and JavaScript. So, David, do you care to enumerate the differences between Java and JavaScript?
Wait, are you asking me to read this off?
Oh no! Sorry, the answer is of course not.
Oh, oh.
How would you answer that question?
How would I answer that question? Well, I mean, I've already seen part of the answer there, so it's not really entirely fair, but okay, well, I guess what's the best way to put it? I mean, it's sort of an interesting question even to ask.
Well, it's kind of like apples and oranges, right? Like
It,
enumerate the
it is. I mean, a
differences
lot of
between
people
apples
say,
and
"Oh, well,
oranges.
Java and JavaScript, there must be connection because, of course, they have a similar word in their name."
Do you actually
Um,
know what the connection is, by the way?
um,
Because there is a connection in the name.
yeah. Well, I believe they were, if I recall, and this is becoming more of a history lesson than really a
No, go for it. This is what the
coding
job
question,
interview
right?
is all about.
Um, they were looking. Uh, uh, no,
Okay,
I
so
think it might be eluding me,
back
but
when Netscape was one of the big browsers, so before that there was
yeah.
like Mosaic and all sorts of other stuff. When Netscape became like one of the dominant browsers, they kept getting more and more features to stay ahead of the other browsers. And one of the features they implemented was a scripting language. And they did this
hmm
very last minute, like history wise, someone coded it up over the weekend or something. And then to market this language, they went to, I believe it was Oracle at the time, who owned Java and asked if they could license, or I don't know if they licensed or kind of use the name to make it more popular. And so they just used the
hmm
name. It had nothing to do with the language, just used the name JavaScript. So it does actually come from Java, kind of, but just the name. Okay, so now moving on, let's get to the real questions. What
Yeah.
JavaScript data types are there?
Right, you got your strings,
Yeah, so string.
you got your integers, you got your floats, you got your
No.
booleans.
Floats and integers, they're the same. I think that's just a number.
It's just
I
considered
think
number.
so.
Okay.
You have object, and then it gets really weird. Then there's like, what is it like? Not a number and something else. There's a bunch of weird ones. Let's see. So number string. Oh, Boolean, of course. Oh, object and undefined.
Undefined.
What is the use of is nan?
Well, I mean, it's a question that you can ask to find out if something's not a number.
There you go. You're hired. Okay, so this is a great one. This is why I chose the page. Between JavaScript and ASP script, which one's faster?
Okay, well, I don't know ASP script.
Yeah, me neither. Does ASP script
So,
even still exist?
well, yeah, I mean, that's the thing. JavaScript has had so much optimization in the last while that I'm assuming probably JavaScript is now faster.
If ASP script still exists. Yeah,
Yeah.
reading into the optimization of JavaScript is kind of amazing how, like, starting with Chrome, right? That was, when was that, 10, 15 years ago when Chrome came out? The reason it was so popular is because it was so much faster than the other browsers. And part of that reason was because they optimized JavaScript by so much.
Mhm.
What is negative infinity?
It's infinity in the opposite direction.
There we go. So anyway, I think we'll skip most of these questions, but this page, like just reading through it, it was kind of crazy. But I guess some people
Mhm.
perhaps, like for example, this one: is it possible to break JavaScript code into multiple lines? It's like, isn't it in multiple lines by default? But then I guess they mean like one expression into multiple lines, and then I guess you can, but you know that can
Yeah.
go really bad.
It doesn't lend itself to
No.
good readability.
No, and sometimes because depending on how you use it, there's like one example where you have like return, and then in the next line you have like the actual thing it should return, but then the browser normally says, okay, return, that's the end of the line. Well, with other things it might work if it's in the next line, so it's pretty. Okay, so I think we'll skip this one. I mean, most of these,
Okay.
but oh, I love this one. What is a prompt box? And like, as a web developer, I think I go back pretty far, but I couldn't remember for prompt box if that's like the, you know, how you get like alert boxes. There's like the box where you
Yeah.
can type it, or if it's just a normal input.
It's funny. Yeah, when I think of prompt box, I actually think of it on the coding side, firing up the console. It's a prompt, right? Just like firing up the terminal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is actually a valid question. Like I wouldn't use this in a job interview. I mean, I'd use it to annoy my students, I think. But what is this in JavaScript?
Well, I mean, the answer they've got there is it refers to the object from where it was called. I guess you might want to expand about a little bit on that. It's all about context, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a like I'm kind of ashamed to admit my Rails days are a bit behind me, but is there such a thing in other languages? I mean, in certain languages, yeah, but
Um, well, yeah, in Ruby, you can call self.
yeah, depending on yeah,
Yeah. But yeah, it's
which symbol is used for comments. Okay. Let's
yeah.
skip to some more interesting
Yeah,
questions.
I would just say about
Hmm.
this thing is that I know in my personal experience I haven't run into the same sort of context issues um, in Ruby as I have in JavaScript, where suddenly you're making a
Yeah,
call and it's not working right, and it's because the context isn't proper. I've run into many more of those on the JavaScript side than on the
but
Ruby side for sure.
I
Maybe I haven't
feel
been tackling the same problems, but
no, it's definitely a JavaScript issue, and I feel
yeah,
it's definitely an issue that you're gonna run into a lot of the time when you're using the DOM a lot. So when you're like, very close to the HTML, very close to like user input and whatnot. But the further away from that you get, I feel like if you run into these issues, that you could probably code it in a slightly different way to hopefully, not have those issues. Like in,
yeah,
actually saving things in variables and passing them on or whatever instead of. But if you're like very close to like user events and whatnot, sometimes you need, within events, you sometimes need this. But yeah.
yeah.
So let's move on to questions that are at least a little more up to date.
Okay, essentials.
So the problem I have with these questions, so I, I mean, job interview, it's like a big topic in general. So the problem with this page, the first one we went through, is they're just super outdated. But I'm sure like stuff like this still gets asked. The problem on this page is that a bunch of them, I think, are just very bad questions, but I guess we'll get into that. So number one, just the phrasing. What is a potential pitfall using type of bar equals 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 object determine if bar is an object?
Okay.
How often would you want to do that, really? Well, so I think the problem there going to is that you're checking for the string instead of checking for the type. I think so. You're converting the type to a string and then checking the string. I mean,
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think we'll stick with that answer if that's okay with you.
Yeah. I mean, like, well, I don't know. The type of bar equals object. I mean, I guess if.
Admittedly, I've never had to do this, right? So I'm assuming. I'm assuming that this is the way to do it, but perhaps there's a downside of doing this as well. But I mean, when would you ever need to do that? Well,
if type bar equals object. Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to the next one.
I don't know. You should provide like an extra interface, and maybe clarify it with the username or with the method name, maybe, as opposed to doing sort of checking internally.
Well, and when would you want to even check if it's like an object? I mean, JavaScript, everything's an object, right? Kind of, I guess. But okay, moving on to the next one. This is one. The first one was kind of okay. This is one where I feel these are kind of like the little gotcha questions. Like either you happen to know this little tidbit of information about how the language works or not, because technically this could be a question like any programming language, and either you know how it works in that language or you don't. So the point here is you have A equals B equals 3. So basically the question is the assignment. What does the assignment return? So if you have like B equals 3, what is the return value of that statement? And I think in some languages it's true if it can do that, but I think in most languages, like in JavaScript, I think it actually returns the value. So I think A and B are both equals 3. But
equals 3, yeah. That's
or does it equal true in JavaScript, because JavaScript
that's the question. Like, often people will initially think of variables as it's like a box where you put something in, or on the other hand, is it actually just a label and you're putting it on? So, for instance, you have A and B equaling the same thing. So if you modify A, it also modifies B. So
interesting. So here they say, so generally, so it does equals 3. I mean, like, number one, I feel you should never write this code if like the person has to think about what's going on here. Is like, this is bad code. And right here is like the case in point. So generally it'll work, but if you use strict, so basically force JavaScript to use a more strict way of running by having the use strict at the top, it'll give you an error, which I think is correct. In this case, it'll give you the error that B is not yet defined, because it'll try to apply that first, I guess. But
there you go.
Oh, now we're running into the really fun ones. So we have an object, and that object has the property bar, and it has a function. You save self in this, and then you say outer func this.foo and self.foo, and then you have an inner function this.foo self.foo. Yeah, I don't even want to think about that one.
Okay. Interesting.
So I'm assuming the way it is, this.foo doesn't work within the inner function, because that's outside of the scope. I'm assuming it works here, but not here. Self should work in both, I think.
That strikes me as correct.
Let's see if that is correct. Yeah, so that's the way. So this.foo, the scope is just too far. The way that I see it, and I might be very, very wrong, but in general, the scope normally works like outside 1, but not 2, basically. So, but maybe there's something else going on here because it's in the function. These are things that I don't want to think about. This is a fun one. What's the significance and reason for wrapping the entire This actually, I think, is a valid question to see if someone has JavaScript experience or not. Like, I don't think it's
Yeah.
important necessarily to know this, but if they've had a bit of JavaScript experience, chances are they've run into this.
Yeah. Well, you see, CoffeeScript when compiling automatically does this
Yeah, yeah.
wrapping,
And TypeScript
and
and everything.
from my understanding, it's encapsulation, so you're not leaking stuff out.
Exactly, because otherwise everything that you wrote right on the top level basically is a global variable.
Hmm.
And I guess a more elegant way, so this way you just encapsulate everything into one scope that's hidden from everything else. A more
Hmm.
elegant way of doing it, though probably overkill for many things, is if you put like in a module, because then it's also encapsulated. So basically you stick it all into something instead of polluting the global namespace. Have you ever used strict? Like in big projects, you don't need it because it does it automatically. So
No,
basically, you
I've
can put
never.
it on the top of anything, like either on the top of some sort of curly bracket scope or on the top of a JavaScript file, and then
Hmm.
JavaScript will be a bit more precise about how it handles things. Like you can't use a variable without declaring it first, for example, which you can normally,
Hmm.
and some other things where it'll tell you no, you can't do that. It's the way it's meant to be, but they didn't want to break everything. So if you include that on the top, it's a bit.
Well, it's good to have some guidelines, some organization, right?
Exactly. It's kind
And
of
and
like
hope.
what your editor normally tells you, this is wrong, this is wrong. JavaScript will actually break then instead of just, giving you a little warning.
Yeah. I mean, like, if it helps to cut down on bugs that you write, like, well, maybe you still write them, but at least hopefully you catch them.
Yeah. Well, and in this
Yeah.
case, there'll be an actual JavaScript error for a lot of things or warning. So
Hmm.
it's okay. Consider the two functions below. Will they return the same thing? Oh no, I hate this already. Okay, so
Okay.
do you spot the error here? So no, they won't return the same thing, obviously,
Yeah,
and the reason
so
is
one they've got a bracket on one line
yeah.
and one on the other.
So right here, it assumes that return is like the
Turn.
entire thing. It's sort of like doing return semicolon here. I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it returns undefined. So the question, it's a trick question. I mean, whatever.
Yeah.
Do you happen to know this? I have no idea what
What
the
is
type
not a
of not a
number?
number is. I don't know. It's
Oh, my guess would say be object.
yeah. It's probably. I mean, everything's an object, right? So it's a number. Okay. Now we learned it's a number.
A number is a number. Yeah.
Oh no. So what will this code? So the first will obviously output 0.3, I hope. And the next one will output, so I'm assuming that this is evaluated before anything else. Well, let's see. So I didn't see the answer
Yeah,
yet.
what's your order of operation there?
So I'm assuming this will be evaluated first. So it'll be 0.1 and then false.
False.
I think so. Okay, so the first one is because JavaScript's silly. But the second one is, oh, it's only false. Oh, so it actually
Yeah.
does the addition first. But once again, like to me, this is bad code. Like put the brackets there. If there's any
Yeah.
question
If there's
about it, like
any ambiguity over the order of operations, add some brackets to make it
yeah,
more clear.
discuss possible ways to write is an integer. So first you have to check if it's a number, right?
Yeah.
And then you want to check if it's got decimals. I'm assuming, is that what they want here? If it's like
Yeah.
a whole number.
Yeah. So I suppose, well, yeah, you could turn it into a string and then check for dots.
Yeah, that's a really clever way, but there's got to be some other way with like modulo or let's see what they propose.
Math round.
Oh no, I'm really bad with
Exponents.
with bit shifting. XOR. Well, it's not bit shifting,
Or,
I
oh,
guess.
yeah, but yeah, that's right. Sorry.
Oh, of course you could just round it and check it against the rounded. That's
Hmm.
that's a good solution. That's what if I had thought of it, that's the one I'd be happy with. So you round it and then see if it's the same.
Hmm.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, yeah. Oh no, this one. So when I applied a long time ago to some job, I got a couple of JavaScript questions. Most of
Hmm.
them were pretty silly. Some of them were like super old questions. Some of them were just silly. Some of them were easy. And this is the one question that I got wrong. Oh no, it was actually a different question. Sorry. This was also one of the questions. I think I got this one right. So the way it is, do you want to have a go or?
Yeah, well, when you said timeouts, like, I don't know, for me, it's like you're throwing it to the wind.
Exactly.
But so
Float
it
away,
may
my
not.
pretties.
I look at this and I get the feeling that there may not be a consistent result here.
No, there is.
But
There definitely is.
on inspection, I'd say it would probably go 1, 4, 3, 2.
Yes. And
Yeah.
so the way this is, I think this is actually perhaps a valid point of discussion with JavaScript developers. I think a lot of very good JavaScript developers perhaps don't understand it, and hell, I don't. But not that I'm such a good developer, but how the queue or the stack works. And so basically, what the set timeout 0 does is, because normally JavaScript, it's everything is like done line by line, and there's no way to interrupt stuff. But as soon as you do like a set timeout 0, even though you say basically run in 0 milliseconds, run right away, what it does is it takes that command and puts it at the very, very bottom of the queue.
Yeah.
So basically it does everything else it has to first, and then, so it's basically just sort of, you relieve the pressure. You say, okay, like just put this at the bottom, put this in. And then the 1000 obviously is, in 1000 milliseconds. Oh no. Write a simple function that returns a bool is a palindrome. Palindrome is the same reverse and forward, or?
Yeah. So a simple function returns a boolean.
Should we write that, or? So what I do is I take the array, then I just go to half of the array. So basically, from 0 to half of the array length. And then I'd always check the current one to array length minus I. So basically you check the last for each other, and then you check the next for each other, and the next. And the middle one, either there's something there or not. I don't think it matters, I guess, depending on what the definition of palindrome is.
Yeah.
Does that seem reasonable?
There's no string method in JavaScript that you can do just a dot reverse.
Oh, no, there is.
There is?
Because you can. Oh, it has to be the same reverse. Oh, yeah, that's a lot cleaner. Yeah. So, it's kind of silly, but the way you do it is you say, so you have the string, then you say dot split. You say what it should split it with. So basically just enter an empty string. So then it'll turn the string into an array. So basically dot split with quotation. Then you say dot reverse. But then because still an array, you have to say dot join.
Join it back to
once again with just empty quotations, and then you can equal that to the original string.
So, but it's possible we're over 160 characters. I don't know.
No, that's pretty short. I don't know. That would be pretty silly then. I don't care. Like, how often in the last, I don't know how many years you've been coding, have you gotten the mission to, okay, you have to write this feature, but you have to write this feature in less than 400 characters.
We have that luxury. There's not that constraint.
Write a sum method which will work properly. Oh no. So these are the ones that I hate. Okay, so what you have to do, I think, is number one, you have to check how many arguments you get. And if you get 2 arguments, there's probably a more elegant way of solving this, but if you get 2 arguments, you just add them and return them. If you only get 1 argument, then you return a function that takes the first argument we got from the outer and takes the value it gets in the new function that you're returning and adds those 2 together.
Yeah.
So either you return just first plus second, or you return a function that returns the first plus
that takes a new argument. Yeah.
It's
there you go.
Yeah, exactly like this. I think it's a bit of it's like functional. It goes into the direction of functional programming where you return
a little bit of recursion.
Yeah, exactly. Like in this case, there's no recursion, but ideally there you would solve it with recursion, I guess.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Well, I mean, you sort of have all the elements there, right? You've got a function that calls itself, and
Yeah.
then you have a condition to stop calling itself.
Yeah, yeah. And what you have to know here is number one, that how to check arguments. I guess this is actually a pretty elegant way as well, that you simply check the second one for undefined. That's an okay question. Oh no, what is this? Create element. Okay, so we create an HTML element called button 5 times. On the button, we put in a text node. Where we say button plus I, so that. Oh yeah, okay. I know the trick here. They're all like trick questions. So basically, you're creating buttons. The buttons have text: button 0, button 1, button 2, button 3, button 4, button 5, and then whenever the user clicks on the button, this function is called. And the joke here is that it's not going to output 0 to 5 because I, at the point of the user clicking on the button, is 5. So no matter what button you click on, it's always going to return 5. I'm assuming. Okay, I don't even know. Okay, the number 5 will always be logged. Yeah, it's just a bit of a trick question, I feel.
Yeah.
Okay, assuming D is an empty object in scope, what is accomplished using the following word? For each TK equals undefined. Okay, do you want to answer that, or should I? I mean, it seems pretty silly, but...
Well, it looks like you're taking the object and you're assigning it keys, zebra and horse, and to each you're assigning it undefined.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. I'm pretty sure that's it. Yeah, they'll be undefined. Okay. Yeah. Well, that was exciting. Oh, here we have the reverse split thing, by the way. What will this code output? Oh man, this is already so complicated. Like, why would... Okay, so we split John into an array, then reverse the array, so it's NHOJ. Then array 3, so we push that. So basically it's NHOJ, I'm assuming. I'm assuming you can push arrays onto other arrays. I've never done that, but... Oh no, that's wrong. Sorry, this array is actually pushed into the last position of that array. So the array will be NHOJ, and then the last spot within that array 2 will be an array itself.
Oh yeah, look at that, huh?
Yeah, like this. So it's an array within an array. They wanted to get us, but we are too smart, yeah? See, this is the one skill I'm trying to in all my life. Like everything I try to do, it's the one skill I want to achieve. When I'm old and before I die and whatever, is to become really good at JavaScript job interview questions, like all these trick questions. Like before they even ask the question, I want to be like, oh yeah, I know what's going on here.
Imagine if this was your actual work. You're having to always solve problems where they're trying to trick you.
Imagine if this was your work. You go into work and you have code like this, and then it's like, oh, fix the bug, and you're like, okay. Like, for example, this. What does this do? I don't know. I'm assuming, like, this is just, it depends. Like, this can be different in every language. I'm assuming in JavaScript, this is 1, 2, 2, I'm assuming, but it might be... And I'm assuming that this, because it's written in such a weird way, turns this into a number, so it's going to be 3, and then 2 because it's a string, and then this is going to be 0 and 2, and this is going to be 1. So this will be like the number 1 and then 1, 2, and this will be, I don't know, it's not a number or something, and 2. I don't know. Wow, I was surprisingly right on that one.
Yeah. What will the code output to the console and why? Well, you take the code, you put it in your console, and you find out.
Exactly. Ooh, recursive code. So this is interesting. So the following recursive code will cause a stack overflow if the array list is too large. The correct answer to this one is no, it won't anymore, because in ES6, I believe they implemented tail recursion, which I have absolutely no idea what tail recursion means, but supposedly it stops this from being a problem by not adding stacks into stacks, but basically just leaves it on like one level. Instead of going like thousands of levels down and using lots of memory, it just always stays in one level if it keeps calling itself. So, that problem is solved. Oh no, what is a closure in JavaScript?
Oh, yeah, no, this is getting a little bit muddier for me. I mean, I
Oh no,
think
I
I
have
know your
absolutely no
closure.
idea what a closure is. But what, from my understanding, is it's basically
Makes me
you.
think of a proc in Ruby.
I don't know what proc is.
Yeah.
So the way that I see it, and I might be completely wrong, is you basically package the current place where you're executing something and the scope around it. So basically, like in the examples above where we could access the variable outside of it, that is kind of like part of the closure. So, it's like the whole package. Oh no, do you see it completely different?
No, no, I mean, that could very well be it.
There's the inner function
The
that has
inner
access to
function.
the variables of the outer function. So but it only has it like outside of one, I think. So obviously it has the global
Yeah.
functions. Obviously it has the variables outside. Variables within the
But it
closing
doesn't have
sets.
this.
It doesn't have this. Well, what is this? Who knows what this is? So yeah, I think it's always like one. So basically, at least I think it's a bit clear in other functional languages of which I don't know very much about. But there, I think it's a bit more well defined that you sort of send the closure on, or it's sort of like a whole package. On JavaScript,
Mhm.
it's kind of just it kind of works or not. Oh, this is the same trick as before. So it'll do this every second, but I won't actually be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I will always be 5 because at the runtime, I is 5.
Mhm.
So I, in this case, is not. So in this case, we actually access the I variable from the outside and we don't like copy in. Like we don't, duplicate the variable. So the variable isn't duplicated
Yeah.
and frozen in time as 0, but we always access that variable and that variable changes.
Mhm.
So it's always 5.
Yeah.
So if you get these questions, the answer is it's always 5. Oh no, this one. So this
Okay.
equals 1. So it's basically 1. So this equals 1. So right here it goes to 1 because 0 is false, and so it goes to the second one. Here it's 1 because 1 is true, and so it doesn't even look at the second one. Here it's, I think it's true, false, and here I think it's true. Or does it actually return 1? And does it here return
I'd have to
2?
run it. I'd have to run
Does
it
it
in
return 1 and
console.
2, or does it return true and false? It returns 0. Well, that's not what I was thinking. Because they're both true, so it returns the first one. Huh, I would have thought it returns the second one. Then
Yeah.
why does it return the second one here?
So I guess so. The 0 is just false.
Yeah, is that really? I mean, I believe them, kind of.
Check that.
Let's
Yeah.
check that out. I don't believe it.
So I guess in the other one it's an instance that 1 is true, and then it goes on to the next statement and returns the
Interesting, but
2.
then why does it equal 2 here? Oh, I'm not sure if I even want to know.
Oh, hold on. Are you saying 0 and then 2 is equal to 2? I think that should still probably equal 0,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
because the first one is false, so it doesn't go any further.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it only goes as far as it needs to go, and then
Yeah.
returns the
Short
value, which
circuits.
I think is, well, I guess it makes sense, but it's still a bit weird to rely on these things. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I thought wrong. Yeah, that's been talked about.
Yeah.
uh, uh,
Okay.
oh no. So, okay, hold on. So A is an object,
Gosh.
and that object at the position of this object is 1, 2, 3. I have no idea what JavaScript does with that. If you want to
Yeah,
access
I'd have to run this
the
in order to know
property, so
what's going
basically
on.
you're applying the property, and instead of just having the name, it uses this. But I'm assuming it turns this into object, like a string object or something. So it would be A at the position object or something.
Hmm.
Oh, sorry. The whole question was 4, 5, 6. So I guess number 1 you can do that, and number 2 it'll be 1, 2, 3 because it stringifies the parameter. Okay. Oh, and they're stringified to object. Okay.
Object,
So my explanation kind of made sense, but I was still wrong because so this is A at the position object, and then you overwrite A at the position object, because that's what we do all the time.
Especially in the early days, I remember always trying to figure out types of stuff in JavaScript and getting object back when what I wanted was a class name.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's like the
Yeah.
worst, right? When it stringifies everything. Oh no. So this is a recursive function.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, this
okay.
is where are they looking to introduce sort of pipe operators at all in JavaScript? Is that something that's coming about?
You mean that you take the output of one thing and put it into the next
And put it
thing?
into another. Well, yeah, I mean, it
Well, you
allows
mean
you to
sort of
write
like in.
something.
Have you ever worked with Jquery before? No,
No,
no, I'm
Phil,
serious.
never.
Okay,
Of
so
course, of
jQuery, it
course.
was back when we didn't have good tools to reliably access the HTML elements of the DOM tree from within
From various
JavaScript.
browsers.
Yeah, and so jQuery was this tiny library, but it was really really well done, and everyone used it, like everyone. And the coolest thing about it was that you could easily, I don't think they called it pipe, but you could basically add functions onto functions. So for example, you had like DOM tree dot filter, everything with this in it, dot sort, dot this, dot this, and they kept on passing things in.
Chain them all together.
Yeah, chaining. Yeah, yeah. So,
Yeah.
and the thing is, with functional programming, you can kind of do that, but you usually have to return a function that then does something. And so it's like, I don't know if there's anything new in the pipeline for introducing it. Do we actually want to think about this one, or should we skip this one? Because,
Okay, well, let's have a look here.
okay, so,
So it gets called with it's past 10. Is that right? Yeah.
yes, if it's
Return.
larger than 1,
Yeah.
then it returns the number times, basically, is that the exponential, like the number to the power of, or it returns the number itself?
Well, this would just be multiplication, right? Times our function.
Yes,
N
you're
to-
correct.
Yeah.
But it'll be 9 times 8 times 7 times 6 times 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1.
Yeah.
So basically it's 10. So the result, I think, will be like 10 times 9 times 8 times 7 times 6 times, right? So that's 10 to, I don't know. There's like a simple math thing that I'm not thinking of, but the exclamation mark, isn't it? That's 10 exclamation mark, isn't it? Yeah, 10 factorial. Yeah.
10 factorial. Yeah, there you go.
Boom. It's still very hard to read code. I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh man, my brain already hurts. Okay, consider the code snippet below. What will the console out be and why? Okay, so we have a function that is called with parameter 1
Argument
that
1.
returns a function that says console x. The outside will return that with 2. That shouldn't have been relevant. So it should output 1, I think?
Yeah, well, I mean, it doesn't use that y within the
No.
function.
But maybe there's like
so,
some weird trick we're not thinking of.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that's just a closure. Boom.
Yeah.
So see, we're already leveling up because all these questions are like teaching us about these questions. Oh no.
Okay.
So I'm assuming for some reason that the first will be undefined and the second one will be John Doe, but I don't know why. I'm assuming because when you copy out the function like you do here, so right here we're applying the function, so we're copying this function new variable, and on the bottom one I think we just have the closure, right? So this can access this easily, but right here we're just taking this code snippet and storing it somewhere else, and this somewhere else no longer has access to that.
Access to the.
So this
yeah.
name will be undefined, I think. And then we can, how to fix it, with the bind. Oh, man.
Bind, yeah.
The last time I looked at bind was when I was practicing job interviews.
Yeah, but like, yeah, I mean, yeah, it strikes as a bit of a smell if, you're reaching into another object and copying out one of its functions.
Well, that's the whole problem with closure, right? Like if you're relying on this, as soon as you refactor the code, say, and put this into a new object, suddenly it doesn't work anymore. Like, oh no. No, I agree. A DOM element on the page will visit the element itself and all of its descendants. Well, that's easy. But you can just say DOM document or the DOM element dot query selector, which is a cool new. It's not that new. It's like 10
Is
years
there a
old.
children shortcut?
You mean like the direct children, or?
Yeah.
Yes. So there's like a child node.
Also, but hold on. This is recursive. This is like all the way down. This is
Yeah.
not just immediate
No,
children.
query
Okay.
selector. Query selector will do that.
Yeah.
So, for example, if I have just a normal website and I use the query selector on any of the elements, let's see, the Google page might be a bit too complicated, but let's just, sorry, my browser's a bit slow right now for some reason. So if I, for example, say let's div equals document, so the entire thing query selector, and I'll just grab the first div, right, whatever that is. Hold on. Either there's no divs on this page or I'm doing something wrong. Okay, let's grab all of the elements. Yes, I know, thank you. Damn it, I'm being too cool. Okay, fine. Let's see what happens if I already have a... Okay. I thought that would happen.
Okay.
I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Document query selector. Okay, anyway, my coding fail aside, there is actually a thing called query selector, and that will return all of the... So basically, it looks through all the children, and so you can just enter a star, so the CSS selector star, and that'll give you all of the elements. Obviously not the answer they're looking for, but it'll work. The answer they're looking for is element.child nodes. Then you go through all the child nodes, you grab all the child nodes there. So basically, you recursively call itself. It always returns all the child nodes, and you return it. So basically, you call the own function on all of the child nodes. So for every element. Okay. I kind of botched that explanation, but so I guess children. I thought child nodes.
Yeah, that's what I was referring to initially.
Well, child nodes includes like text nodes and whatnot. But then basically you call itself on all of the children. So yeah.
So it reminds me of doing what's the 8 queens problem?
I don't think I know that one.
Well, it's where you have sort of a chessboard and you have to arrange all of these queens in positions where none of them would be able to attack each other.
So do you just brute force it or try everything?
I brute forced it with recursion, but I don't know. I found some like micro optimizations, but it's still, I don't think they've found a solution where you can effectively solve it for sort of like larger numbers. It just takes longer and longer and longer.
Yeah, it seems like it might be a hard problem to solve without just brute forcing it. Yeah. Should we move on to the next page, or do you want more of these questions?
Well, yeah, let's move on to the next one.
Okay, so that one's coding. That one's mostly silly. Do you want some where I don't think we'll actually code, but we can talk about how we coded, or do you want one that are sort of okay?
Yeah, let's do a coding one. How we might code
coding. We can do some of the coding if you want, but some of the coding is pretty. I don't know, man. Okay, let's see. So this is just a random page. Questions you might face during a job interview and their solution. Okay, so it's basically a white page with white text. Why is a page slowing me down? I wonder what my computer is doing right now. Okay, if Firefox fails, then we just go to Microsoft Edge.
This is the one with Chrome under the hood, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it was kind of weird. I don't use this Windows installation much, but even though it was Windows 10, it came with Edge, and I had to like manually, sorry, not Edge, Wave. Well, what are they called? It came with the old one, and I manually had to install the new one, and I was like, oh, that's weird.
Oh.
Okay, it's still loading for some reason.
Emulate Vue.js. Oh, okay.
That sounds like a fun problem.
Oh, gosh.
No, actually, that one's not that complicated.
No, what is it? Just
okay.
Well, I guess.
So
sort of,
basically,
what are they looking to do?
So basically, So I've read this one before. Sorry, I'm jumping around a bit. Okay, here's the actual code. So given this is basically the template you get, so the HTML, the text, whatever. And basically you're completing this code. I mean, this code doesn't really matter too much, but basically what you want to do is you want to replace anything within the curly brackets, in this case message with message, and this is just the root of the HTML.
Okay.
Do you want to walk us through this? Should we code this? Should I start?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've actually used Vue a little bit. I mean, I've toyed with it.
Oh, I haven't used it at all, but I'm sure it's very cool.
Yeah. It's funny. I actually worked on a small thing actually to sort of try and teach basic programming concepts, and I rewrote it in Vue. Yeah, is it Vue or Vue?
I have no idea. Let's say Vue.
Vue, yeah.
Vue.js.
Okay. But yeah. So okay. Well, what are we looking at?
So first we have to create
a
the
class.
Vue class, right?
Yeah.
So we create the Vue class. In the constructor, it gets a bunch of options. So it gets one option element. And so the first thing we do is we take the property EL of that option element, and that's like we say document query selector, and
it's our selector.
Put this in, and then we get this HTML node.
Mm-hmm.
Then we somehow have to find this, and then replace it.
Yeah.
So the replacing is probably just with. So I'm assuming we get the text node if we can somehow find it, and then we replace it with a regular expression. I think in JavaScript you can say string dot replace.
Mm-hmm.
And then if we simply enter exactly this thing, so basically we say curly bracket, space, or I don't know, we can get rid of the space if we want to, space, and then property data dot. So for every data property, we have to do this. So basically replace, we construct this, and then we replace it with this.
Yeah.
But the question is, how do we find it? So we have to traverse, because theoretically it could be like in a child text node.
Yeah.
So we have to search the entire content for text node, and I'm not sure what the most elegant. So this is something that I'd Google, right?
Yeah, sure.
But generally speaking, I'm assuming you can check. So perhaps kind of like we did before, we have to check. There might be a more elegant way of doing this, but for all of the children, like for everything, we check all of the nodes. And if one of these nodes is a text node and contains this, or it doesn't even matter if it contains, we just we run this replace on all the text nodes. So we have to manually go through everything. I don't know if there's a more elegant solution.
I'm sort of thinking also a little bit ahead to what do you do when you get nested components?
Yeah.
I assume you'd want to obviously have all of your interpolation done for the smallest unit, and then so that, for instance, if you had message data at 2 layers, it wouldn't overwrite it.
Yes.
With one.
But honestly, I think I'd just do the simplest implementation, and then I'd write. So these are the ways it can go wrong, and these would be the steps to fix it.
Yeah.
Let's see what they have as an answer. Or
do they ask you to write a test first?
I don't think so. You can if you want to. That's like showing off, right? If they ask you to oh, can you code this? You're like, okay, I start by coding the test. I'm like, ooh, yeah. And then I do test-driven development with pair coding, and I choose you. Okay, so we have the constructor with the options. So first we get the query selector, and then we have the data. Yes. For each key EL inner
in the data.
I didn't think of that. That's an interesting way of doing it. So basically what they do is they take via the inner HTML, it turns all of the children into a string, so basically an HTML string, And then in the string, you do the replace, and then you apply that string to inner HTML. So basically, you turn it into a DOM again.
Yeah.
That's probably the best and fastest way of doing it. It's obviously not a very good way, but...
Well, it's written eloquently.
No, but the problem is that you lose, I believe, like the entire, like for example, if you have event listeners on one of these elements, you lose all of that.
Oh.
Like if you have any data written there, anything done with JavaScript, well, you
Oh,
still have
yeah.
that. Basically, it turns a DOM tree into a string and then into the DOM tree again. So it's a good solution. Like, don't get me wrong. And if I would have thought of it, I would have done it. But it comes with its downsides.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it strikes me as, yeah, like you're saying, it loses all sorts of functionality. Vue most definitely I say most definitely. I'm not sure. I haven't looked at their source code, but they probably have a solution that's
but I think you still are going to have to traverse all of the nodes within this construct and basically check each text node. It's not pretty, but
yeah. So well, they just I mean, they're just replacing the whole thing. Instead of the individual bits.
Oh, here they actually go through everything. Okay. So they go through all of it. They do it with a while loop. I probably, even though I hate recursion, probably do it recursively, but whatever. Or just call the function. It doesn't have to all be inline. But whatever. I'm nitpicking. Sorry. This is interesting. So they go through everything. They put it onto the stack. So basically, they take all the elements. They put it in an array, basically.
Yeah.
And then they say if it's a text node, replace it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So basically, what we were talking about. Okay. Should we go on to the next one?
Sure.
Okay. Oh no. This is the one where I fail, I think. Async series in parallel. Let's just look at the challenge. Run the functions in task collection in series. So we have a bunch of functions. We want to run them one after the other after they've completed. If there's an error, call that. Otherwise, just store all of the stuff, all of the returns, basically. Okay, so we have an array, so a list of functions, and we have a callback function at the end. Well, I mean, that's pretty easy to start out with, right? We just do like for each on this array, so basically, or a for loop, whatever. We loop over the array, and we just run the function. So basically, just call it with, round brackets.
Yeah.
If there's an error, I'm not exactly sure how they determine if there's an error. Like, do we...
I guess, are we going to have to do sort of like a try catch?
Maybe. Well, let's ignore that for now.
Okay.
So the weird thing is that I hadn't really thought these functions then call the callback, and the callback has to just store all of the results. Okay, so we do the loop, we call all of the functions, and then we just store it here in an array. And in this original loop, we have to somehow detect if there's an error. I'm assuming with try catch, but I haven't done that in JavaScript, so assuming that try catch works, we do it there, and if we ever catch anything, then we just return the error. Otherwise, and basically abort the function. Otherwise, we this function just returns it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
Let's see what they do. Let's see how wrong we are.
Okay.
Okay, so here's the loop. Okay, so series. If error, task length, blah, 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 blah. Sorry, hold on. Let me scroll up again what the original code was.
No, that's okay.
Oh, so this is actually a function that has two parameters. Okay. These are always like the simple things that I miss. Oh, so how do we actually write the code? Okay. So right here is the function with the two parameters. So that's where we store the result. That's where the callback is called. If error. Oh man, my brain already hurts now. So how are you doing? Let's trying to understand this code.
Yeah.
Oh, so they actually check.
So
So they actually check the result. Okay, okay.
yeah. But it's funny, you know, like when I think of what if error
Oh,
instead of
I think I've
storing, I don't
already
know.
given
Like
up on
when I
understanding
think
this
of
code.
errors, I think of stuff blowing up. I don't think of something that you'd turn around and store in a variable.
Yeah, I guess. So this calls itself recursively.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, I think it's basically the same thing, only recursive. And here it says, but how does it differ with the error? Oh man, I don't know. Oh man, my brain's already broken. Too many JavaScript job interview questions. I have not yet ascended to the plane, I must admit. It's probably really easy if we like take a 3-minute break or something and then sit down again. It's like, oh yeah, okay. So it's recursively calling this, and you know, this is the result that we store in our array for the end. But if there's an error, or if we've reached the end, then we call back the error and the results. But I thought we were only supposed to call back one. Anyway.
Mm.
That's about my understanding. So it recursively calls itself, and at the end it returns either if there's an error, it immediately returns the error, or at the end it returns the error and the results.
It looks like it returns both. So I guess you can get the results of what it was able to
Oh,
achieve so far.
I guess I just didn't read the original code properly, because this is the callback that's called at the end, right? With either the
Yeah.
error or the results. Okay, that makes sense. That's why it's calling both. Yeah. I guess recursion. Yeah, I don't know. The thing is with recursion, I mean, it's kind of cool sometimes, but you can normally just solve things either with a loop or recursion. And sure, it's, I mean, you know, but sometimes it's a bit harder to read, I find. Are you happy with this explanation?
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Okay, doing it in parallel. No, I think we'll skip that one, unless you want to do it in parallel. A draggable button that changes the background color.
Okay.
So this is very high up in the DOM.
Okay, and do they actually have an example?
No, I think you have to try it yourself. So,
You have to try. Okay.
oops, I don't know where I clicked there. I don't want to tweet that, thank you. Implement a button that can be dragged around. As it moves towards the edges, the background color changes from white to red.
Okay.
So this one I think I can kind of do. I've never done anything with drag, but I think there's DOM events that are like drag, start drag, end on drag. So basically what you
Yeah.
want to do is, so basically when you drag something around, it's sort of like, you know, this weird outline that you have. Only in this case, I think we actually want to move the button around, which is a little bit weird, but
Yeah.
because he implemented with Draggable, I'm not sure if I really would do that.
Yeah, just to be sure, that's not a property that enables an element to be draggable. That's just like a marker, right?
Kind of. Not the way you think, though. It doesn't allow you to move the object around. Like, it doesn't stay wherever you drop it. It's more like, you know, if you have an image, and then you click on
Mm-hmm.
it, and you sort of can drag it into another application or something,
Oh,
it
interesting.
activates
Okay.
that. But I think by default, well, I guess by default, buttons aren't draggable, so you can't, like, click and drag it.
Yeah.
But I think I would still do, if the user clicks on the button, so on
Mhm.
click on the button, then as long as the button is pressed, actually I do it differently, and this might be a bit weird to explain, but on mouse move on the button, I think you can do mouse move on an element, provided you
Mhm.
can. On the mouse move, you check if the button is clicked. You can do that because the mouse move event actually has the button property. Are you amazed that I know all these things?
Right. I mean, I'd tell you my solution. I'd go look for a dragging library And I'm sure they'll be loaded with callbacks or or sort of events or what you need. And I'm sure there would be one that corresponds to gives you like is moving.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Whenever that fires, then you can go about and do your background color change.
Yeah. That's probably the best way to do it. Meanwhile,
Yeah.
I'm following the mouse around and then also changing the color. Yeah, I guess there's so many ways of doing it, but either way, this code is going to be super messy. This is going to be super messy code. So they do it with. So there is a drag event. I think it looks slightly different. I think they're using it from this library, from RxJS. Okay, moving on to the next. Slide out animation. So number one, I just do it with CSS, but they obviously asked for doing a slide animation without CSS. Okay, whenever an element is clicked.
Okay.
So we have HTML. So first, so this is stuff that I do way too much with my students, I guess, or similar stuff, or in the vicinity. So first you want to move it outside with CSS. So you probably have like, depending on how you move it, just like position absolute, right minus the width, or you just move it out to the right somehow.
Yeah.
And then as soon as you click on it, well, you don't want it to be too far out because you can still click it. Anyway, you position it wherever you want to with position absolute. Then when you click on it, we have a JavaScript loop running with a request animation frame. So basically it's sort of like set timeout 0, so it just calls itself.
Yeah.
And in that we set the CSS property transform X, so it moves to the left or to the right, and just increment that by some counter. We could probably even do some sort of Bézier curve. I think there might be a library for that or something. Yeah. So they do the loop here. Oh, they check where they are at the moment. Yeah, you can either do that or you can have it's nicer to do it with time. That's definitely true. So it's not performance dependent. So not every time you run, you move it by a certain thing, but you say the animation is always going to be like 100 milliseconds. That's a nice solution. And then you translate X by that value.
Yeah.
And you request animation frame it.
Yeah, well, that's I mean, the whole fact that they're using the window request animation frame should give you a pretty smooth result.
It should, but it's always nicer to do these things via time. So basically, you check how much time has passed from this frame to the last frame, and then you say, okay, by that amount we sort of move it because we want the whole thing to be 200 milliseconds, and 10 milliseconds have passed, so we're going to move it by 20 pixels or whatever. It doesn't really matter, but it makes it a bit nicer because otherwise on really slow devices it's going to take twice as long to slide out. But it's fine tune.
Well, yeah, I mean, has that kind of manipulation sort of caught up in speed with in terms of like compared to what you can do with CSS?
No, so the thing is that you always want to do it with CSS because if you use something like the transform property, so there's things like translate where you can move it around, scale it, you can rotate it, you can skew it, you can move it 3D, whatever. These things are all done on the graphics card on a different level almost. If you take a div and you make it larger, you have to recalculate the whole layout because it influences other things. So that's very CPU intensive. I mean, nowadays they're all so fast, you can probably get away with it. But for example, if you say a div width +1 and you run that in a loop, that's like super compute intensive because every single time it's going to have to recalculate the entire layout. Well, if you translate something, the magic thing there is that it doesn't influence anything else. Like if you translate something, everything else stays exactly the same, which is good and bad. It only changes that element. And so basically what it does is it takes that element, takes a screenshot of that element, sends it to the graphics card, and then the graphics card just moves it around or scales it or whatever. So you kind of use both, right? You use JavaScript and CSS. Nowadays everything's so fast. Oh, I actually have one more job interview question if you want. This is one that I actually got from the one that I mentioned where there were all these weird questions. They actually had a coding part too. And for this coding part I had an hour overall. So for the coding part I had, let's say 40 minutes. And the thing was you get a string. You get a string of parentheses, sort of like, for example, like this.
Okay.
So I don't know. Are there any other parentheses? Oh, I guess they're these. And basically, you want to check if it's, I guess, a well-formed string. Meaning, does every parenthesis open and close?
At the correct point.
Yeah. So you, for example, this wouldn't be correct, even though you have the same amount. And I thought that was actually a pretty good example. Do you want to know how I did it, or how would you do it, or should I give you some time? Sorry. Because first it was tricky. At first I read that and I was like, well, I'm out. I'm like, I'm gonna be here. And then I actually sat down and I was like, okay, hold on, this can't be that hard.
No.
And the solution that I came up with, it seemed like it was a shortcut, but I think it's the only proper way of actually doing it, frankly. Yeah. Because at first I thought you have to sort of do some sort of queue where you store everything, and then you'd have to store every type of parenthesis in some other queue maybe, but then how would you know which one's first and which one? And it just gets super complicated.
Yeah. Yeah, it's sort of that's actually sort of what I was for you.
Well, that's the obvious way.
Most of these cases, right? you want to I guess if anything to get it done, you want to lean towards some sort of brute force way of doing it. So like it makes me I think like I would like go through it and try and find the smallest unit and then sort of expand off of that and make sure everything's valid.
Exactly. That's also how I did it. So you go in, you find the smallest unit, and you work from that.
Yeah.
Do you want to elaborate on that, or should I?
Oh, you can elaborate. I mean, if you've done it, you know it.
I know. That's why I'm cheating, right? I'm like, oh, I know. Look at me. I'm so smart. Yeah. So the way I did it, and once again, maybe there's a better solution. But basically, so first I trimmed all of the other things that weren't parentheses because who knows how they might try to trick you. Yeah. But then I went through and I actually coded this because then I had so much time, and it's basically the same thing. One's recursive and one's just in a loop because it doesn't matter. And then I started removing parentheses. So basically I removed this, and I removed this, for example. So I kept removing things, right? So I go through the string every time.
That's great.
And every time I went through, I removed either ands or all of them. So I removed basically any time that this occurs, you remove this.
Yeah, and do it recursively, so you keep compacting it down. Yeah, that's great.
Basically, while there's a string left, you remove it. You remove this, for example, and at some point, if there's any string left, so for example, in this case, we'd remove this. At the end, when there's nothing else to remove, when it says removing is done, and there's still a string left, then obviously it was false. Otherwise,
invalid. Yeah.
Otherwise, it's true.
Yeah, that's great.
But that's definitely sounds like, that's what you would have done, with like trying it out, sitting there, coding for a minute or two. Yeah. And I thought that was actually a fairly decent exercise. But, so I think I actually passed their test. I got the one question wrong. Hold on, let me see if I can actually still find that one question. It's a bit of a weird one. And then I knew that I had gotten it wrong. And then I was like, damn it, I got it wrong. But it's such a weird question that is like, I don't know, man. It'll probably take some time actually finding this. And so anyways, then I got that right. And then they replied with what my salary idea was. And I wrote them, and then I never heard back. It didn't even reply to it. Oh man, I'm probably not going to find this. So the thing that I got wrong had to do with hoisting. Yeah, there we go. This one.
Oh, variable hoisting,
So it's
sure.
something that I read about. I read about, then I forget. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I think it works is JavaScript, for some weird reason, anytime there's a variable definition, like right here, it takes
It's
this
pulled
definition
up.
and pulls it to the very top of the thing.
Yeah.
So in this case,
Yeah.
you'd expect the answer to be 21 because kind of like, oh, it does this, then does this, then it's 21. But actually, it pulls it to the top, I think.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
hold
this
on, the
is
answer's undefined.
this.
Hold on.
Well,
Maybe that's why I got it wrong because it is undefined. What?
it's saying it's not
Oh,
hoisted.
it's not hoisted. Or maybe JavaScript. I thought JavaScript was. I don't know. Like whatever. I read about hoisting and then I'm like, okay, I'm doomed.
Yeah. My understanding though is that I mean that's actually one of the real advantages of using the letter const um, declarations is
Yeah,
that you
yeah,
know
like let
it's not
and
a problem that you have to think about because everything's properly scoped.
yeah, exactly. No, it's
Yeah.
so there was something with hoisting. I thought, don't know if it was that one. Anyway, I got that one wrong. Just like I get this one wrong. But the joke is, you can just copy this and put it in the console and try it out. But oh well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean that's the reality of a lot of working through this stuff is that you have to try it out. You can't be expected.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
think. Well, I suppose you could expect yourself to know all these things, but there's a lot of going on, and you know, it's important to have fluency in your language. But I mean, the real stuff that you want to be figuring out is what's going on in the domain.
No, totally. I agree.
Yeah.
And so the best job interviews that I ever got where you had to code was actually then just doing a project. It obviously takes some time, and so either they hopefully pay you for their time or whatever. But then you actually sit down and like there's a certain expectation. You'll spend like a couple of hours or however long, and actually
Hmm.
code something without stress or whatever, without a timeout, without a whatever. Just sit down and just do what you want to, and maybe make it so complicated or so large that you'll never finish. But just start and see what you start out with, what you tackle.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
that was actually one of my favorite ones. Though the problem there was that. So this was for like a WordPress company that I was applying to. Actually, it was WordPress itself, so automatic. And so basically, they gave you gave me an old WordPress plugin and said basically, refactor this. And I've never done anything like that, and I hadn't done PHP in ages. But it wasn't too hard. I started refactoring and then got into it, and I made it super clean without completely rewriting it because I didn't want to do the obvious solution of completely redoing it. But I felt I
Hmm.
made it
Hmm.
pretty clean, and they were pretty happy, I think. But then apparently I missed one security issue that they kept asking me about. Like, okay, everything looks great, but there's one security issue here, and I'm like, I don't see it. And then they kept out, and then so I wrote back like, I this and this and this might be an issue. And they're like, no, it's something else. And I'm like, this. So basically, they didn't give me any hint, and I didn't guess whatever they wanted. So they were like, nope. And then at the end, I was like, so can I get the answer? And they're like, no, because we'll hope you'll reapply. And I'm like, no, I'm good, thanks.
So it was essentially a bug bounty.
Yeah. And so I think the problem
Right?
was, like in
That sort of thing.
retrospect, I think the problem was basically the way the plugin worked. There was a fundamental security problem with it because it accessed like content from other places or something. And I'm assuming that's generally not allowed. But
Hmm.
I think at that point, number one, I just thought it was a given because that's otherwise the plugin wouldn't work. And number two, I didn't know much about WordPress, so I didn't know what plugins were allowed to access or not. So, but in general,
Hey,
it was a good experience for like the coding part. But then it was a crappy experience of like, if there's just one thing you don't get and there's no hint, and then it's like, well, okay, whatever.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, ideally you can take some learning away from the process at least. Um, I was gonna ask, was the plugin open source? Like, was there anything you could go look at
No,
afterwards?
I was just like a really, really crappy old example plugin or something. I don't think
Oh,
this was something that was actually used. It was probably just either super old code or they wrote it on purpose, just in like a really crappy way. Yeah, but
I'm assuming you've seen those challenges. What's the worst hello world that you can write?
So on actually a different job interview I got, and this is one that I sort of bombed where I shouldn't have. The question was to so normally you have like console.log,
Yeah.
and that should output it. And the thing was to expand it to console.yell. Oops. And then it should simply do
And
that in
upcase it?
uppercase. Yeah. And so the problem was, and I'm pretty sure this is why they didn't contact me later on, was that I thought completely wrong. Like I think the right way to do it is you say console.yell equals function blah 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 blah, right?
Okay.
And for some reason, and this is because I had read too many of these JavaScript job interview questions beforehand, I was working like with a constructor. I was like new console something that didn't make sense. And I kept doing that for like 5 minutes or something. And the problem was the person asking like didn't give me any hint or like and so I was like, hold on, this doesn't work and this doesn't make sense. Why am I? And then as soon as they said it, I'm like, oh yeah, obviously, it's like this is the most obvious thing. I don't know why I didn't understand, didn't get that. And so to me, it was a bit disappointing because it was like something that was very obvious for me, or like something that I could definitely do. This was like the easiest part of the whole thing, and I just was on the wrong track. But they didn't correct me or help me. And then later on, you sort of expanded on that, and there was some really complicated stuff with callback functions where you had to like dot bind and call things from somewhere else. It was like really, and I got all of that right away, but just because at the beginning I was like, hold on, they're like, nope. And I mean, once again, like that's such a simple mistake. I should have made that. But on the other hand, it's like, well, yeah. So those are my job interview regrets of my life.
Well, yeah, I mean, I haven't had too many in the coding space yet. So
No. I think most of them. So number one, I think it's a great opportunity to actually see how the company works.
sure.
And number two, most of them are actually like meant to be pretty good. Like it's always going to be like a anxious and stressful situation. Like even if they just ask you your name and nothing else, you're going to be like, oh shit, I hope I don't get this. So you're always going to be like in this weird spot. But I think good interviews, they like put you at ease and work with you, and it's not so much about having those clever questions like either the answer or not. Like they used to ask about why are sewer covers round, for example. That's like either you know it or you don't, or maybe you just happen to figure it out in the moment. But I think the answer, by the way, so they can't fall down, because if it was square, it could fall down into the hole. I think that's the answer. But these are like either the answer or not. These are like stupid questions. And I felt that a lot of these JavaScript questions that we went through were like that. Like if you have A equals B equals 3, either you know that or you don't know that. It doesn't really necessarily correlate to how skillful you are.
Yeah.
And so
it's
I think
it's more like it's testing your ability as a compiler.
Exactly. How good of a compiler are you? Well, if you're a good compiler, at the very least, you throw a warning and say unambiguous. I don't know.
You can throw a style there.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think that's enough. I think that's
Okay.
all the job interview questions that I could possibly think of.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, in going with what you were saying, it sounds to me like the more positive job interviews, there's an aspect of seeing how you can work with the person and how they might function on a team. And
Yes.
I mean, that's something that's probably a little bit harder to gauge.
Yes. So I think a lot of companies don't do this as well as some other companies do. So you're number one, you don't just want to know how technically competent you are. You want to know, like, will they fit culturally,
Sure.
and what soft skills do they have.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, there's like yeah, I mean, I could talk about this for hours, right? It's like it's a topic that I find so absolutely interesting. But I think of the more important of those is like, does the person fit into the team, especially in small teams? Like will they fit into the team? Will they work well with the team? Will they get on with the team? Because if you hire someone like the rock star ninja super coder, but they don't play well with the team, then the whole team's going to be sad, and then it's problematic. It's like
Yeah.
it's not
Yeah,
always
no,
that
you
easy.
want people who sort of allow everyone to level up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why there was a nice quote that I kind of like, is where you should look for your job, and I guess the reverse also works. You should look for your job according to the team. So basically looking for people that you want to work with, and then you can always find and do like the tasks that you want to, because that team will let you evolve, and will let you find your own niche and whatever. And I guess it's the same with like looking for people, right? You want to look for someone that fits into the team, and they can always learn whatever library you're using, whatever this or that you're using. They can always do that, but they have to fit into the team.
Yeah, it's very true. That's I think if I'm right, the Israeli special forces, they don't look for people with the absolute fitness. They look for people who will push themselves to the edge, because that you can't really train in a person, but you can get someone's fitness up.
Yeah. No, that sounds reasonable. Like, I don't know very much about the Israeli special forces, but yes, I do agree that people can get a lot fitter. And I'm assuming, like, I don't know anything about it, but like, you probably don't have to be like an exceptional athlete, I'm assuming, to be in the special forces. Like, you don't have to have like an amazing lung capacity or be able to run a mile faster than anyone else. I'm assuming you have to be reasonably fit, but you probably don't have to be like that 1% top professional athlete tier. So, and like, most people can get reasonably fit if they want to, and you put them on the right training plan.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it.
And I guess it's the same with coding, right? You don't need those superstar coders. I mean, they can be great and whatever, but you can get most people up to a coding level that that works well, as long as they can communicate and approach the tasks in the correct way, and work in the team and do pair coding and code reviews, and the process works.
Yeah, it's yeah. I guess there's an ability to right into problems, and you said communication. Communication is very important. I don't know. I can't remember where I read it, but someone was saying if you have two people who are fairly evenly matched, and one is a better writer, hire the writer.
Was this per chance advice given by the Writers Guild of North America?
Quite possibly. Sure. The Screenwriters Guild of America.
So it's actually funny you mention that, because I feel that I don't think I'm a very good writer, but I get what you mean with the communication and whatnot. But for example, I speak two languages, German and English, but I pretty much only write in English. And whenever I want to write in German, for example, in our blog, I always have a really hard time finding the right phrases, and everything sounds really clunky. And in English, I could just use all these phrases that already exist in my mind. And in German, I'm like, hold on. So it's just so much harder to actually get the words out there. It's like, even though I speak German, I'm better than I do English, but writing, it's just because I don't have that much experience. It's like, I just feel so wrong.
Yeah. It's interesting, and of course, I mean, I'm sure that the programming also informs the kind of writing that you're doing. I mean, you look to write everything eloquently, cohesively.
No, absolutely. That to me is always the main point, right? To write code that is easy to read, like, if not for someone else, at least for yourself. That to me is always the highest goal.
Well, and for yourself, for when you have to come back and
exactly, even if it's just you. Like, I was taking a look at some code that I'd written, like 4 years ago or something. Actually, it was the portfolio that I made a long time ago. And some of it I was like, oh yeah, this is really easy to read, also because I remembered it. And then some parts I was like, I have no idea what's going on, and I don't even want to know. I'm like, if I do anything with this code, I'm just going to take that chunk and just rewrite it, because that's just like, no, it's trying to be too clever. And for me, it was the same thing when we learned to code. We actually learned in C a while ago. And in C, you can do bit operators. So you can, sort of like the one example we had with Jquery, I think it's called, with the XOR, or you can like do bit multiplication or whatever. And you can do some really, really clever stuff with that. But, oh man, if you don't know how to do it, it's just like, or only a little bit, it's like impossible to read. It's like, it's super clever, but, oh no.
Yeah.
Unless there's a really good reason, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I assume you could probably squeeze some pretty good performance out of it, but
Well, in C, you can actually inline assembly code. So you can, you know, if you want to have like a function and then just super optimize it, just write an assembly code.
drop into assembly. How about that?
Well, there's the same thing in JavaScript. You can technically write like, I think, WebAssembly, unless that no
Yeah.
longer exists. You can write, you know, on a lower level. But
Yeah.
JavaScript's pretty good at, you know, if it notices you run something runs like 100 times or so, then it just, you know, optimizes that and, you know, drops down to lower and lower levels. And then, you know, it's gotten pretty fast.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, I mean, be pretty, yeah. You have to think highly of yourself if you feel that you could probably do better optimizations than most compilers.
Well, you know, there's the famous quote that premature optimization is the root of all evil.
Oh, sure, sure.
So, you know, no good for that. Anyway, I think that's a pretty good a spot to end. So we went through a bunch of job interview questions. Yeah, well, let's hope neither of us gets asked many of those questions anytime soon, or any time in our life. Not so much that, you know, finding a new job or whatever, but just like those questions. You know, it's like, oof. Oh man.
Well, we you know, we hopefully if we're put in the position um, to ask questions like those, we can come up with some that are
Better, or more clever, even more clever.
clever.
They're like the next
Why?
level.
Yeah, but are more effective in achieving our purpose.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So anyway, so thank you very much for your time.